Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for another exciting edition of Science Division Live. Today, we're going to be giving you a little bit of a crash course on some creatures that you might see in your backyard, around your neighborhood, and we're going to be talking all about bees. That's right. Do you know about bees? Do you recognize the species that you see in your yard? And did you know that bees can sometimes live in colonies? They sometimes live alone. They're different from wasps and hornets and other yellow stripy things that you might see out and about. That's right. We're going to be telling you all about that and about a lot more. I'm connected via Zoom today to Dr. Gabriela Chavarria, who is our Vice President of the Science Division and our Chief Curator. She's also an expert on bees. So she's going to be telling you today all about what you need to know about the things that are buzzing around your backyard, and you're going to have a chance to ask your questions live and on the air. My name is Talia. I'm the Virtual Experiences Coordinator at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and I'm here today to be your host and moderator. I'll be watching the stream on my handy dandy device this entire time. So anytime you have questions, anytime you have comments, leave those in the comment section. I will be watching and I will be ready to direct those questions to our expert live, as I mentioned before. If you haven't already done so, take a moment to type in that comment section now. Say hello, let us know where you're watching from today. Maybe you have a young scientist watching with you, and maybe you have some bees or some other critters in your yard that you'd like to tell us that you've seen. I know that during these times where the world's been closed down a little bit, one of my saving graces, one of the things that's helped keep me sane while I've been staying at home and staying safe, is looking out my window and studying the nature that's nearby to me. So if you've been doing the same thing, we would love to know what you saw. Without any further ado, I'm going to turn it on over to our expert. Gabby, how are you today? Tell us a little bit about what you're going to be sharing with us.
Oh, good afternoon, Talia. It's so great to hear you. You're so cheerful. Just, I get re-energized. And I am so excited that, we're doing this program today because I'm sharing with all of you my favorite topic. And that is really incredible that I get to talk about my favorite creatures in the whole world. And those creatures are bees. And I hope you all can see my screen now.
We see it, looking good.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So what I wanted to do today with you is to share a little bit about bees. But before we start talking about bees, I have learned through the years that most of us started our lives talking about bees, about everything. If it's a yellow jacket, it's a bee. If it's a hornet, it's a bee. If it's whatever, everything we call a bee. So I wanted to, at least for today, that I hope by the end of the program, you will know the difference between bees and wasps. So bees are the ones that produce honey, and they're the ones that help us pollinate a lot of our agricultural crops. And wasps, for example, do not, pollinate. They are carnivores, and bees are vegetarian because they only feed on pollen and nectar. And that's why, yellow jackets or wasps come to your picnic table because they want a little piece of your hot dog or a little piece of your sandwich. Yes, they're very aggressive because they're hungry, so they want a piece of your hot dog. And bees tend to be more gentle in nature unless we provoke them to be aggressive. Then that's when they sting. And usually another big difference between the two of them is you see them in their legs. The bees' legs are usually covering hairs, and the wasps are not. Usually when wasps fly, their legs are down below their bodies, and the bees are a little bit constricted because, and you probably know what I'm going to say next, the stinger is also a big difference between the bees and the wasps, particularly honeybees. Honeybees, this is a honeybee, and you can see the stinger, and if some of you have ever been stung by a honeybee, I'm terribly sorry. They probably were not in their best behavior that day, but they usually don't, they don't tend to sting, but their stinger has these barbs. So when they sting you, those barbs get stuck in your skin. And that's why, it's so painful sometimes because, you get the sting inside you. And the bee dies because, her whole body is in your hand or whatever they sting you. And in the case of wasps, it's like a needle. So they keep stinging you many, many times. And, and what also happens is they don't die. So that's a big difference between the bees and the wasps. But, this difference is only with the honeybees and the wasps. The majority of the bees do not sting, the native bees. Only bumblebees will sting occasionally, and they do have a stinger like the one wasps does, so they can sting you several times. Another big difference, as I was saying, is the legs, because the legs in bees have this famous pollen basket, and this is where they collect all the pollen. And you will know that's a bee when you see the pollen. You will never see a pollen basket in a wasp. And bees, we have about 25,000 different species of bees in the world. And bees come in all kinds of colors, flavors, sizes. It's such a diverse group. It is really incredible. And we here in Colorado, we're super fortunate because we have about 940 different species of bees. And that does not include the honeybee, only native bees, only the 940 native bees. And here I wanted to show you that, bees come in different sizes and colors. Here you see the largest bee in the whole world, this megachilid that lives in Indonesia. And then we have the smallest bee, it's a little perdita bee, that some of these species we can find here in our backyard in Colorado. Bees, as I was saying before, they're great pollinators, and they're great pollinators because of their pollen basket. And some of them, you can see in this picture, can carry lots of pollen in that pollen basket. So that makes them the best pollinators of our plants. And because they're all covered in hairs, that pollen gets all over their bodies, so they carry that back from flower to flower, helping the flowers reproduce. Some of them get it all over their faces. And bees also, you probably know these are the honeybees. These are, bees are social and are also solitary. So the honeybee is a very social species. We have learned to use them, and they really like living in these commercialized boxes where they produce the honey. And I think most of us love to eat honey. But these honeybees are not native to the United States. They're native to Europe, and they were brought into the American continent because we like honey and we needed to have honey, but also we needed them to pollinate a lot of our agricultural crops. A lot of the food we eat needs to be pollinated by honeybees. So, but we have very few species of bees that are social. Honeybees are one. And another good example are, the sweat bees or stingless bees that live in, the tropics of the Americas. This is a photo of the famous Mayan bees that live in the Yucatan Peninsula. Their honey is delicious, but a lot of them are disappearing because they don't like to live in the commercial honeycombs. They like to live in their own combs and the combs that they make. So, so the production of honey cannot be as much as the regular honeybee. And then, if you didn't know this, bumblebees are also social, even though you see only the single females, the queens early in the spring alone. But then once she figures it out and she starts building the nest, they build a nest and they're social. So they have, in Colorado, our colonies are probably no more than 80 individuals. That probably will be the largest. But we have over 20 species of bumblebees here in Colorado. And the majority of the 940 species live solitarily. And they live, some of you might have some of these condominiums or bee houses outside in your yard. So they like to be in their own little home, even though they're surrounded by others. It's like an apartment building, each person has a home, but then, you have your home alone, but you're surrounded by neighbors. Bees are the same way. They like to live in company. So here you see a lot of, if you go into the nature and you see a lot of holes like these, in most occasions, they belong to native bees. Sometimes we see them in the ground. They nest, they make these little holes in the ground. Or, like our dear friends, the Carpenter bees that a lot of people are afraid of. They do not sting, and, but they like to burrow their nest in, on not processed wood. And they're very good at it because they have really good mandibles. And a lot of these Carpenter bees also like to dig holes in trees and other wood cavities. So we have a big diversity, as I was saying, of bees, and in colors, in shapes, in sizes. So I invite you that, after this presentation, you go into your garden or just go outside, find flowers, and look for the bees. Many of them are so little that you really need to get close to the flower and see these little incredible insects collecting pollen from the flower. And remember, most of them don't sting, so you are totally fine in getting close and see how hard they work. A lot of them have different hairs and different shapes, and you see the big tongue that most bees, all bees have, because that's how they eat the nectar from the flowers. And all of their colors are just really incredible. And you see the big legs full of hairs because that also helps them collect the pollen. Many of these species, like I said, live around here. So we need to make sure that you need to start, like a lot of bird watchers start a bird list. You can start your bee list because we have 940 here in Colorado. And of course, my favorites are the bumblebees, and we have many of them, and I'm sure all of you have seen a bumblebee in your backyard. This one is very popular around here with the orange in the back. But anyway, I wanted to make sure that you all know now what's the difference between a bee and a wasp. And I put this slide in here so that way you tell me what it is. What do you think this photo is? Is this a wasp or is this a bee? Remember bees?
Tell us in the comments.
Bees were all covered in hair so that way they can collect the pollen, and their legs have the famous pollen baskets. Wasps don't have pollen baskets. Bees are vegetarian. They love eating pollen and nectar. And wasps are carnivores. They like to eat meat, and that's why they come to your picnic table. So hopefully you guessed this right. How are we doing, Talia?
I see lots of comments coming in, and so far every comment that I've seen is wasp. Is that correct?
Yes, that is very correct. So I feel really good that, today, and you're going to go out and you will be able to distinguish between a bee and a wasp. And then I have another quick quiz for you. And you will see a slide, a picture now of 3 different kinds of insects, A, B, and C. And I want you to tell me of these 3, which one is a bumblebee. And this will be a bumblebee that is native here to Colorado. And, bumblebees, remember, they're friendly, but they also live in colonies. The queen starts the colony alone early in the spring. So you will see these big bumblebees flying early in the spring. And we have about close to 24 different species of bumblebees here in Colorado. So we're very fortunate to have, this huge diversity. We're the 2nd state in the whole country with a high diversity of bees. The first one is California.
I see comments starting to come in, and so far everyone is voting in favor of B.
Yay! So this is great. So I congratulate you all for, learning about bees and wasps. And I hope that, with this little presentation today, you'll have a different view of, bees out there, and you will see the value and you will learn all about them when you go into your garden and start exploring the different kind of bees that come to your flowers.
Absolutely. Now, before we jump into taking questions from the comments, I do see one before you stop your share that I want you to answer right now, because we have a question from Sarah wondering, so what is C then? Is C on this slide a bee or a wasp?
C on this slide is a wasp, and you can see this a yellow jacket. You see it from above, and you see that it has no hairs. Usually wasps don't have any hairs on their abdomen or on their thorax. And you see their skinny legs that have no hairs because they have, they use them for flying. They don't use them for, collecting the pollen like, the legs of the bees that are thicker, so that way they can collect the pollen.
Wonderful. All right, let's have you stop your screen share and we will start to pull some questions from the comments. Thank you for sharing all of those beautiful pictures. I have to say, my favorite part of that presentation was just seeing all of those wonderful pictures. As I mentioned, I'm already an avid nature watcher. I love to go out to, I have a community garden plot, and I love to go watch the bees and all of the other creatures that I see flying around, but it's always amazing to get to see them up close. So hopefully today, some of you who are watching from home have gotten to see some of these creatures in a new way, and maybe you learned something about bees and wasps that you didn't know before. That was our whole goal. All right, let's grab a couple of questions from the comments, and do keep those coming, folks. If you have a question that you haven't sent us yet, send it along. All right. First of all, we have another question from Sarah, who's wondering, I'm starting a bee house for solitary bees, and I know that I need to watch for a kind of wasp that might invade the house. What kind of wasp do I need to watch for?
Well, many wasps actually will invade your little condominium because they're carnivore, and there's fresh meat inside your condominium. So what you need to do is, put it in a place where you will be able to observe the condominium. Don't leave it alone. And, and you just need to keep an eye on the condominium. A lot of yellow jackets and hornets, even spiders will come into your condominium because inside that, each of the holes, bees are laying their larvae, their eggs, and pretty soon little bees will come out. So you just need to be observant of your condominium. And, and if you have, it's like, if you live in a condominium, you have a general manager that keeps an eye on the building. So it's the same with you and your bee condominium. You need to keep an eye for your bees.
That's right. You are the bee landlord. You have to watch out for your little bee tenants. Question from Catherine. So one thing that we definitely want everybody to come away watching, or everyone watching to come away with today, is the knowledge that honeybees, the ones that we see all the time, are not native to the United States. And there are lots and lots of bees that are. Catherine is wondering, when were honeybees brought to the United States? How did they get here?
Actually, honeybees have been around for a very long time. When the first colonists from England arrived in the New World, they realized that there were no honeybees, and they miss honey so much. So they decided that in the next round of, colonizers that came, everybody make sure to bring some honeybees. And that's when, honeybees were established. So they've been here for, over 200 years. But they were also needed because these colonizers started to bring and plant a lot of the agricultural crops to eat. So those crops that came from Europe needed to have the native pollinator to Europe, which is the honeybee. And that's why here, we need our native bees to pollinate our native plants, specifically here in Colorado, our plants of Colorado.
That makes sense. And it's maybe a bigger subject than we have time to get into today, but it is
correct
about how humans are part of the ecosystem too. We shape our environments by controlling the movement of plants and animals, and invasive or introduced species can certainly cause a big problem, but a honeybee is an interesting example of a time when maybe that introduced species was needed to be able to support the development of the land, for better or for worse. All right, more questions coming in. Let's see what we've got. Question from Tara saying, I've heard that bees can sting other bees, but can two bees of the same colony sting each other? Is that a behavior that we might see in bees?
No. Bees usually don't sting each other. That would be very rare. Only will happen when, the queens are producing a colony and they're getting ready to go and fly away. And if they're competing for males or they're competing for food. But bees tend to be not aggressive. You will see that behavior sting in a lot of the hornets or in a lot of the wasps. But the bees tend to be more docile, even honeybees.
Very good. Another question from Sarah saying, so if I see a bee-looking creature in a flower, can I reasonably assume that that's a bee and not a wasp? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about, do wasps and hornets and some of these other bee-looking creatures play an important role in pollination or not?
Yeah, they do play an important role only because, they're accidental pollinators. By looking for prey in the flowers, they get to move some of the pollen from flower to flower. But they're not real pollinators. They're not effective pollinators like honeybees or like other bees because they don't have the right structures to do that. So you do have to be careful if you want to look closely. But now that you know what a yellow jacket, like a hornet looks like, if you see those legs and you see that insect that has no hairs, you are sure to be, not to get close. And they will tell you if they're a hornet or a wasp because they will immediately go after you. Most bees are so busy collecting the pollen and the nectar that they will totally ignore you. So they will let you see how they work.
There you go. So yeah, it sounds like maybe bees are more likely to be in flowers and wasps are more likely to be diving straight at your head.
Yes.
Pretty easy to tell apart. Good. More questions coming in. Question from Colette saying, I have a neighbor who puts out the yellow plastic Hornet Catcher, which is sadly also catching bees. Is there a good alternative that I could suggest to my neighbor to help get the hornets but leave the bees alone?
One thing that people have tried to do before, those traps are so harmful, not only to bees, but to a lot of the beneficial insects because they get attracted. So we lose a lot of beneficial insects in those traps. And for the one or two hornets or yellow jackets that will fall into that, they're pretty smart, so they will not. I usually, when I go to a picnic, I always put aside a little piece of meat, a little piece of ham or a little piece of sausage. And, so then immediately, the hornets or the wasps tend to go into the meat area. So you could potentially try doing a little bit of that just to start capturing some of these bees. And then, I'm sorry to say these, but you can drown them in a little bit soapy water, and that's okay.
I have to say, I kind of love the idea of bringing an extra tiny little serving to a picnic for some of our natural neighbors. I kind of love that. That's adorable and a great solution. Question coming in from Antonio. While bumblebees, are clearly the best. Wow, opinions coming out, although I think we have some folks who would agree with you. Carpenter bees are also very cool. Do only the females make holes? How many eggs do they put into one hole? And how many holes would one female make? So carpenter bees, tell us a little bit more about them.
Oh my God, carpenter bees are amazing. I know a lot of people do not like them because they tend to drill in your porch. But if they do that, it's because your porch, your wood was not treated. So they, immediately look for, good wood where they can drill a hole. They are solitary bees. So it's only one bee, one female bee. So they only will drill one hole. And their hole is probably about 5 inches, the longest. So they're not like termites. They don't cause, a lot of damage in your wood because they just stay in that little hole. And they usually just tend to build a couple of cells and they will lay probably about a dozen eggs. And if we're lucky, we probably will see probably 2, 3, maybe 4 baby carpenter bees coming from that hole. So, and they're very loyal because one of those little bees will come back to exactly that same hole. The mom will die at the end of the season, but they're very loyal to the hole. So if your porch is not treated, you probably already have a big, big family of carpenter bees there. And they're beautiful. They're, they're great pollinators, and they do not sting. They do hover in front of you to kind of like intimidate you, but they're pretty friendly and they're great pollinators. We do need them in our gardens.
Very good. I think we have time for 2 last questions for you. One of them comes in from Nancy saying, what's your favorite bee, Gabby, and why?
Bumblebees. Bumblebees are my favorite bees, but I have to confess that when I was little, honeybees were my favorite. And honeybees were the ones that I discovered first and that got me really excited to learn more about them. I was fascinated by honeybees because they produce honey, they produce pollination, and I went to study my college degree specializing on honeybees. And then one day I discovered a bumblebee nest, like the one I showed you in the picture. And I became fascinated. I wanted to know everything about them. So, and I started to look in the literature, and we knew very little about them in Mexico. I'm from Mexico, and we knew very little about them. So I decided to study more about them, and that's why I became an expert on bumblebees.
I mean, it's cool to think, one species can sometimes change our whole lives, right? So even if, honeybees are not native to the United States, even if it's, maybe interesting to think about loving honeybees, especially because our native bees do need a lot of help and do need a lot of support. They got you on the path to where you were today. So I think that's
exactly. And I love honey. We all love honey.
We do love honey. I'm now craving a little bit of honey with my lunch. Actually, I might have to change my lunch plans to make sure I can have some honey on it. And then one final question for you before we say goodbye for the day. What should people who are interested in helping bees do to maybe make their yard better for them as habitat, or perhaps share with their neighbors something that they could do to make their habitat a little bit better? What words do you have for people interested in learning more? What you got?
If you really want to learn more and want to do something for these native pollinators, the first thing is, if you have a yard, do not use any kind of pesticides. Chemicals are horrible to us and to the whole environment, and they are really detrimental to a lot of these beneficial pollinators. And if you're here in Colorado, use plants that are good for the habitat. They don't require a lot of water. So use a lot of native plants. We have a lot of great nurseries around here that specialize, and they produce a lot of, our native plants that we have here. So that would be really, really important. And, we have, the Colorado Native Plant Society that will have a lot of information on what to grow. And we have a lot of resources. The University of Colorado in Boulder, the Natural History Museum has a great handbook on the different native bees here of Colorado. So there's a lot of things that you can learn and you can do very easily in your garden.
Wonderful. Great words, great advice. I do see a couple of comments saying, oh, we have those hornet traps up. We're going to go take them down. So it sounds like you've already made your impact. That is about all the time we have, everybody. So thank you so much for tuning in today.
Thank you.
Love your comments. We love to see your questions. If you learned something today, we always love to know that too. So leave us a comment with something that you learned that maybe you didn't know before, something that surprised you. We love to go back and read those after the presentation. It just makes us feel kind of happy. So leave us a comment if you can. And in the meantime, stay happy, stay curious, stay healthy. And we'll see you back here on the Denver Museum of Nature and Science Facebook page with more exciting content in the coming weeks. Thanks, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Get out there and look for some bees.
Yes.